Welcome to another live edition of Seahawks Forever, powered by BetUS. And once again, Bryce Coutts of the Hawkzone Rundown podcast will be joining me tonight. We're going to talk about Mike Macdonald and his end of the season press conference. First chance he's had to do one of those as a head coach in the NFL. And while some of his press conferences, many of them have been a big nothing burger, as he became pretty adept as a head coach as the season wore along at saying a whole bunch of nothing at some of his press conferences. Some of that for good reason. Today, I thought there were some juicy nuggets to take away as we head into this offseason, and Bryce and I are going to break all of that down for you. Coming up next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
I mean, the silver lining of being in this situation is, and the opportunity that you're presented is, you do have a head start on the rest of the league to a certain extent. So this is something we really have to make sure we take advantage of. This is a position we don't want to be in ever again. So hopefully, you make the most of it. And now we're kind of springboarding into creating those opportunities.
So that was part of what Mike Macdonald had to say today, kind of laying out the land and putting a positive twist on the fact they didn't make the playoffs this year. They do get more time to do the heavy lifting of the offseason and get into it soon enough. Bryce, thanks for joining me again. Always good to talk to you. Let's start at the top. What were your overall takeaways today from Mike Macdonald's end of the year press conference?
My overall takeaways for today were, you can see a guy that has learned from the season, has a very, very strong view and conviction of what he wants to get done this offseason. And he really wants alignment and shared vision going forward from everybody in the organization. And I think that's the one thing that we can kind of take away from this season with the Ryan Grubb firing. And when he alluded to it, and obviously we'll get into it more on the show here, but there was definitely a misalignment and a non-shared vision. And I think that's why you see, even today in his comments, and he kind of, alluded to it a little bit more on why things just didn't work out here in Seattle for those two.
Yeah, there's some good sound to be taken from that press conference. We'll play some of those sound bites here for you to react to. I know we also each have our notes of some other things that stood out. And then in chatting before we went live tonight, you threw a new name at me for a potential offensive coordinator candidate that has me really intrigued. So stick around for that, you guys, because I want to get to that here in a few minutes. But before we dive into this, though, just want to remind you all about the special promotion going on at BetUS right now. The playoffs are still going. There's still live betting, prop betting to be done. All of their point spreads are up. And if you open a new account today, they'll give you a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit, 125% on your second and third deposits, up to $2,000 using the promo code YouTube150. So let's get into some of the specifics. And let's start with a checklist of things that I think most fans are concerned about the most as we head into this offseason. The first one, obviously, is the quarterback. The quarterback gets all the attention. You know that. Someone who coaches quarterbacks, played the position. And there's a big debate out there. There has been for a while, and there will continue to be until either he's not on the team anymore or he wins all pro honors or wins a Super Bowl. It doesn't seem like there's any middle ground for people. But the question of Geno Smith, how Mike Macdonald feels about him and what he thinks his future with the Seahawks are. Here's a little bit of what he had to say today about
He did
Geno.
a lot of really good things. And one of those things is Geno's productivity. And this is something that I'm looking forward to building off of. I thought he had a really good year. I'm sure like when we had a conversation yesterday, but the feeling you get was he's proud of the things we did, but felt like, we could have done a better job as an offense and as a team, and could have put ourselves in a position going into the tournament to go make a run at this thing. I want Geno to be here. I think he's a heck of a player. I'm going to do the first thing always comes back for what's best for the team. I feel like Geno's the best for the team right now, and so I'll be involved with it. Ultimately, it's not my decision. It's a Seahawks decision. So, but Geno knows how we feel about him, and we love him as our starting quarterback for sure.
Cutting up sound from Mike Macdonald because you're tempted to cut out the pauses. But I like the pauses. I think it tells us something about how his brain works. And I think he's just very careful. He wants to choose the right words. But what were your takeaways from his comments on Geno today?
My takeaways from his comments on Geno is I think we can kind of, as a fan base, and I know it's not the popular decision because, like we've said, it's kind of a bell curve with this fan base on Geno Smith. Mike Macdonald believes in Geno Smith right now and where his team is at right now. And I think that tends to lead to they think they're more of a contender than they are in a rebuild. From those words, that's what I was able to really piece out of that is he wants Geno here. But I don't think that's going to stop them from looking. I think there is going to be a serious push this year to go get a quarterback. And I think, when he said what's right for the Seahawks, I think that's where he's alluding to John Schneider, and there needs to be a discussion on how this moves forward past just this upcoming season and this offseason. And that's what's going to be the real question. And, he said he's going to have his say in it. But you can definitely tell that Mike Macdonald has a strong conviction about Geno Smith and how he fits into his plan of what he envisions the Seahawks being next year.
I thought there were in that 55-second clip, I thought there were a couple other interesting sort of subtext storylines to it as well. One was that he did hedge a little bit. He did say it's not ultimately his decision, it's the Seahawks decision. So if John Schneider gets a phone call and somebody wants to trade, a significant package to get Geno Smith, or ultimately he and his front office staff and the powers that be decide that cap space needs to be, utilized in a different way, and maybe they do want to turn the page and start developing a younger quarterback, that's, that is out of his hands. Like contractually, he doesn't have a final say on that issue. Although he talked a lot today, and he has throughout the year, about how he and John are working together on everything. And in the word he likes to use is lockstep. The other one, though, is I kind of thought he was throwing Ryan Grubb under the bus a little bit there in some of the comments he made about how, we would have liked for some things to have gone differently. It was like he was letting Geno off the hook a little bit and putting that on some of the situational stuff and some of the play calling.
I totally got the same kind of feeling from you. And there was a couple other points I could tell he was really putting it on Ryan Grubb without saying, hey, this is like, here's the reasons why Ryan Grubb's not here, though using Ryan Grubb's name, was when he said, we didn't play complimentary football.
Yeah.
Someone asked him about the Cardinals game where they actually did. And he's like, you could see in that game, we played complimentary football. The running game was working. Geno was playing fast. That was the one other interesting thing. I want my quarterback to play fast. And I think this is something.
Yeah. And he
Go
said
ahead.
in that same quote, he said, I want the ball to spread out to all of our playmakers consistently.
Yes. Consistently being the key. And those are two things I noticed going back, and I've already started rewatching some of the all 22, where how many times you could see Geno not getting the ball out fast because there was nothing fast to get the ball out to. Everything was deep and long developing. Yeah. And then, you saw it throughout the season. That first half of the season was really DK Metcalf focused. DK gets hurt. Then it flips and JSN becomes the main focus. Tyler was basically invisible outside the Denver game this year.
It was Bobo.
Bobo didn't get really a target until the end of the year.
Yep.
I think those are the things you're noticing. And this is where you can start to see now, Ryan Grubb isn't a bad coach. Ryan Grubb just has his philosophy and how he operates. And that's where you can see the difference between Mike Macdonald and Ryan Grubb. And then I went back and watched, and I encourage everybody to go back and watch his post-game press conference following the Vikings loss. And when one of the reporters, I don't know if it's Corbin Smith or Greg Bell, asks Ryan Grubb about the sequence, the second to last drive of the game where Geno takes his sack, and how he wanted that to go. And he says, we didn't play complimentary football and we didn't run the ball enough in those situations. He actually comes out and says that. And that to me, and if you read Corbin Smith's article, which is a phenomenal article, I cannot give Corbin enough credit for his research and what he did to make that article happen. Yeah. But he says that was the nail in the coffin. Like, there was a feud going on, and that was kind of the, okay, that's it. Doesn't matter what happens over these last couple of weeks. Ryan Grubb will be out the door. And I think that's why it didn't even take more than 24 hours for Ryan Grubb to be out the door.
Which, credit to you too, because you changed your mind about that time. I think it was after the Vikings game. You flat out told me, I'm done with Grubb.
Yep.
And I still hung on to the idea. I kept I really stuck with what Greg Bell said earlier this season on your show about how they didn't hire Ryan Grubb to be an immediate impact. They hired him knowing there was going to be some growth and development there, jumping to the pros, and that they were looking at it as a long-term thing. Greg may have just misread the situation there. It also may have just gone much more poorly than they thought. We didn't see the growth. We didn't see the development. Even at the end of the year, there were people who analyze this stuff and know the X's and O's like you do, but are above my pay grade. And where they said, look, there just wasn't enough deception. They were predictable. You could tell by formation and when they went to play action, it wasn't believable because they were faking to things they'd never run in games before, things like that I still felt like they were probably going to give him another year. So I was surprised by this, but I'm glad you brought up what you did, because that leads perfectly into this next piece of sound, which does relate to DK Metcalf and touches on that concept you were just mentioning as well.
I felt like we felt DK's presence consistently throughout the year, and there were some explosives that he really tilted the game in our favor, and that's really the vision we have for him. Is we just wish we could have done it more consistently. I mean, early in the season, if you going into the Atlanta game, before he got his knee banged up, he's tops in the league, probably dang near every category, and we wish we could have kept that going since when he got back. So. And those are the things we're looking to build off with DK. He's such a force out there. It's not just good enough to get the coverage tilted him. We got to figure out more ways to get him the ball consistently and let him impact the game with the ball in his hands rather than just moving coverage that way.
What comes to mind for me when I listen to that is that segment that Dan Orlovsky did on ESPN about a month ago, where he basically highlighted as praise for how the Seahawks were operating their offense, the way that they were essentially using DK as a decoy and running all those three by one sets, always having him be the one isolated on usually the wide side of the field while he worked things to the stack side. And Orlovsky's saying, look how smart this is. And here's Macdonald literally saying that wasn't good enough. And we want to actually get the ball to DK more as well. So clearly that's just a partnership that didn't work.
There was one other interesting question asked by Greg Bell. Well, there was a couple, but this one really kind of stood out to me, and I'll just kind of read the quote here. And
yeah.
He goes, Greg asked Mike Macdonald, what is your vision for how you want the Seahawks offense? Look, it's not like we weren't, and this is Mike, look, it's not like we weren't together on this thing the whole ride of the way. We just decided this was the right decision to make, and there's some specifics that I will leave to Ryan and I's conversations today. So I don't know if he screwed up today and tomorrow, but they may have talked today again and throughout the season. We want to mirror our football team, all things that we talked about. It wasn't that we weren't doing these things on offense throughout the year. We've done a lot of great things, but we want our offense to be a physical unit, dictate terms to the defense, play complementary football, and get the ball to our playmakers frequently in space and let our quarterback play fast. That's where I got that play fast from. We were doing a lot of things offensively, just decided to go in a different direction. The biggest two terms there for me in that entire thing, physical unit and dictate terms to the defense. When at all in the Seahawks season, outside of that one Cardinals game, did you feel that the Seahawks offense was a physical unit and dictated terms to a defense? I can think of two halves of football. The first half of that Cardinals game and the second half of the Denver Broncos game when we ran the ball down their throat.
I was going to say the Bronco game. That was one where, first game of the year, obviously. So I was really encouraged coming out of that that we were going to achieve that kind of balance. It goes back to that Brady Henderson report from about a month ago, where he said that when during the interview process, Grubb had to sell himself to Macdonald as a guy that was going to achieve balance and be able to run the football. And he leaned into his early college experience as a run game coordinator and an offensive line coach as part of his pitch. It just didn't happen. It just didn't happen often enough in the way that Macdonald wanted to see. And I think, like you said, the final straw was that Vikings game where they have in field goal range, they have a lead, Was it a 4-point lead at the time?
Yes, I think so. I
And
believe so.
So a field goal would have essentially, almost guaranteed them overtime at worst. And that's when you need to run the football to try to complement the defense and put them in a position to win. And they did. They call that the play that Geno took the sack on that you referenced was a first down call. Like that's just inexcusable. It kind of reminds me of the first drive in Chicago where they run the football successfully. Best we've seen them run it on an opening drive all year. 48 yards rushing. They get down to where they're inside the 9-yard line, and they go on 3rd and 3, and they go empty backfield. They don't even present the threat of a run. I think those things just really stacked up over time. Yeah. There was another point that I wanted to make based on what you just said there. I remember reading a story early in the season about Macdonald's time with the Ravens. And this goes directly to your point about complementing offense and defense, where there was a drive following a long drive where the Ravens defense was on the field for a long time, and he felt like his defense was gassed. And he went to John Harbaugh and he said, "Hey, my guys need a breather." And so Harbaugh then relayed to the offensive coordinator, and I don't know who this was at the time. I can't remember.
I think it's Monken was the offensive coordinator.
It was Monken, or if this was Greg Roman time.
Yeah.
But, well, I guess it would have been Monken because it was after he came back and he was serving as defensive coordinator. And Harbaugh said, "Okay, let's run the football. Let's try to put a drive together here. Let's resist the temptation to take some shots, because what if we score quickly? We got to turn around and put the defense back out there on the field." I think that's just the way he's wired and the way he thinks, and he wants that with his own club too.
No, and I agree. And I think that's where, when he was talking, even in today's press conference, about complementary football, that it just didn't work, because you looked at like different points, even when Seattle had a lead and was trying to, milk out a game or kill the clock or any of those things. Grubb always seemed to want to outscore everybody. I think that was because that's what he did at Washington. They would outscore teams, and you had the firepower to do it. And I even look back to, if you read Corbin's article, another big bone of contention with Mike Macdonald was the handling of Sam Howell, and that whole sequence of plays when Sam Howell came into the Green Bay game, like
12 straight passes.
And then you run Charbonnet for a 24-yard touchdown run, and you've got 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and you're only down by 10. And what does Grubb do? Bang, bang, we're throwing again, and we're 3 and out. Yeah. And I think that's where you can see the disconnect. Like in that situation, you're in basically a 2-score game, but you still have time. You can run the ball and help out your young quarterback. Like asking Sam Howell to come off the bench, he hasn't played all year, and throw 12 straight times is not a recipe for success.
Yeah, not at all. What do you think the future is for Ryan Grubb? The assumption is he's going to go back to college, and I'm sure he'll be in demand there. I don't know if there's any prominent jobs open at the moment. But what about, do you think the NFL is done with him? Like, couldn't he at least potentially be attracted to some team as a passing game coordinator? Because he did seem to have some really cool downfield passing concepts. That's what he likes the most. And he got Geno Smith's best year out of him statistically.
He got Geno's best statistical season when it comes to yards, completions. But then when you go to the touchdown interception ratio, his interception ratio went up, especially in the red zone. And if you're a passing game coordinator in the NFL, Ryan Grubb's red zone passing game was horrible. Like, it wasn't great. I think he's going to end up going back. I think he could also take a year off. I really think he could. The only way he goes back to college, in my opinion, is if it's DeBoer. I think if DeBoer comes calling to him saying, I need help fixing Alabama right now, please come back, because there's familiarity. I also think Ryan Grubb, based on one of his press conferences, is going to be very picky where he goes next, because I don't think he'll ever go on a defensive head coach led staff again. I think he'll go to an offensive led head coaching staff, because when he talked about what it was like to work with, and again, I got to give credit, the guy that's asking the best questions right now out of that Seahawks reporter group is Brian Nimhauser from Hawk Blogger. He asks the most detailed, best questions. Most of the time, things I'm even thinking about, he actually gets to ask, so you get those kind of answers back. And he did ask about that. And Grubb kind of said, yeah, it's weird, they're very holistic in their approach. And when I want 20 or 30 more plays, I don't really get those. But if, when I've had offensive staffs, oh yeah, go ahead, take your extra 20 or 30 plays. And that's where I wonder with Ryan Grubb, why part of it didn't work too, was I feel like when he was at the University of Washington with Kalen DeBoer, he could kind of do what he wanted when it came. Like the practices more revolved around the offense than they did the defense. And then the script was flipped on him this year where it was more about Mike Macdonald, his defense, getting that installed. And maybe Ryan Grubb needed more time for certain things with his offense. And that's why certain things didn't work, because I remember, Greg Bell and other reporters talked about the teaching sessions that went on with Huff and Grubb on the field. And we all were really excited. Oh, wow, look at this. They're teaching these guys and they're really getting down to the details. They may not have been able to get to all the details they wanted to because they just didn't get the time.
Yeah, a couple other things that I thought were really interesting when he was asked about it is Greg Bell asked, is it a priority to hire someone that has NFL play calling experience? He said, not necessarily, right? They're just looking for someone with the right background, the right resume. And we're going to talk about some specific names here in a moment. And the other one was he was asked, would you prefer to hire someone that has autonomy so you don't have to worry about the offensive side of the ball? He said, no, or he said both, because it was one of those questions that was presented to him with an either or. And he said both. I still want to be involved and communicate with my play caller what I want to see, which he should. He's the head coach, right? Let's do this before we talk about some defensive stuff. Since we're on the subject, some new names have come up today, other than what I've talked about on the show and what some other people have presented on the show. Let's see. This is the list I put up yesterday as some potential. These are kind of the obvious names that pop up first that everyone connects the dots to. Mike Kafka, obviously, he was interviewed twice for head coach last year, and they tried to interview him again for OC after Macdonald was hired, but the Giants blocked that move. Doug Peterson, who has ties to the Northwest area and was just let go as head coach of the Jags. Would he have interest in going back to being a coordinator again? Brian Schottenheimer, this is an idea that Corbin floated a couple months ago, has picked up some steam because he did have some success running the football here, although there's some other concerns. His contract expires with the Cowboys in about a week. Mike LaFleur of the Rams, he called plays against the Seahawks on Sunday. He's a guy that has, a long relationship with McVay, and coming out of that tree, it didn't work out for him with the Jets, but that whole thing was just dysfunctional anyway. Not sure if the Rams would be able to block that move as well. Jake Peetz in-house, touch on that in a second. Tanner Engstrand is a guy that's got a lot of buzz, but I suspect he'll want to stay in Detroit when Ben Johnson takes a job and take that job. And then some other names that have some connections over time, Ken Dorsey, Alex Van Pelt. The Peetz thing is interesting because he was asked specifically today, are you considering Jake Peetz as an in-house promotion candidate? And he said, not at this time. Just shut that one down, which I thought was really fascinating, in part because I know you've been on the Peetz train for quite a while now. He's a guy that comes from that McVay tree as well, but also because I think that speaks to something he touched on earlier, which is whoever the offensive coordinator we hire is probably going to want to bring his own guys in with him too, which may impact Scott Huff's position as offensive line coach there as well. Some new names have come up though, that I hadn't thought of. I thought in Corbin's piece today, he listed 9 names. One of them was Adam Stenovich, who's the offensive coordinator in Green Bay, has been for the last 3 years and has a really great resume before that as a guy with an offensive line background and a run game coordinator background. And then obviously working with LaFleur, who I think right next to McVay there is probably the best play caller in the NFL. Be interested to hear your thoughts on that. And then a name that you have introduced me to, Marcus Brady. Why is Marcus Brady a guy that you think the Seahawks might be considering? So
when I heard Mike Macdonald talk today, someone asked him about his offensive kind of view and philosophy. I think it actually might have been Brian. And he kind of went on a little bit of a tangent because Brian made a statement in regards to a quote from Jim Harbaugh. And Mike Macdonald's answer was very interesting to me because he basically said, when it comes to offense, I basically live and breathe kind of what Jim Harbaugh, how I feel about Jim Harbaugh and his philosophy and everything. And you can see the influence and the impact Jim Harbaugh and his style of football has on Mike Macdonald. And I think that's where Mike Macdonald wants to go with his offense. I think he wants, what kind of the Chargers are doing and Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh and what he did at Michigan, because remember, he was a part of those Michigan teams that went to the college football playoff, and he's seen that success. And that's why, for me, the one guy that I've done some digging on, and I was looking and I was kind of like, there's got to be somebody in the NFL outside of Greg Roman that has, is tied or on the staff now, but has some ties to some success, been an offensive coordinator before, and has some NFL background and worked with different NFL coaches outside of Jake Peets. Because when I heard the in-house thing today, I was like, okay, well, Peets might be the fallback option. And Marcus Brady was the guy I came up to. And I know Marcus Brady because I watched him play for years up here in Canada. He was a quarterback in the CFL. And he's the passing game coordinator for the LA Chargers. Oh, I always want to call them the San Diego Chargers, Dan. I always do.
It took me 3 years to.
Yeah, I'm still working through it. And the thing about Marcus Brady, and I texted a few people that I know that are within the league and stuff, and they said that Jim Harbaugh is very particular with who he brings on his staff. He's very particular. And Marcus Brady was someone he wanted. And Marcus Brady was the Indianapolis Colts offensive coordinator in 2021 and 2022 with Frank Reich. And everybody's been talking about Frank Reich. And he also worked with the Philadelphia Eagles the year they went to the Super Bowl as their senior offensive analyst and assistant, helping Jalen Hurts and that offense and Nick Sirianni, because he was the one that actually replaced Sirianni when he took the Eagles head coaching job.
Yep.
Marcus Brady's led an offense that had a leading rusher in the NFL when Jonathan Taylor had his record-breaking year. He's been involved with the Eagles. He's been involved with the Chargers now. He's still a younger coach. He's only 45 years old, but he's been coaching since 2009. And here's the other point about Marcus Brady to me that's interesting is everyone worries about, if you hire someone off, potentially off of that tree, they're going to be so run heavy. They're not going to be very innovative with the pass. Marcus Brady was an offensive coordinator for 5-7 years in the CFL. And everyone, may just, ban that and go, hey, it's the CFL. It's not, it's a joke. It's this. CFL is very innovative with a lot of pass games. Chip Kelly came in the 90s to the CFL to learn his RPO system from Doug Flutie when he was with the Argonauts, then to take it back to Oregon and run it in Oregon with Jeremiah Masoli and Dennis Dixon and all those guys. Yeah. The CFL passing game has big influences into the NFL. Marcus Brady was a 3-time champion as an offensive coordinator, designing an offense in that league, then has come down and learned the run game. So for me, when you talk about balance and you talk about understanding and someone that Jim Harbaugh has gone after, I think there's a good chance Marcus Brady could be someone that Mike Macdonald becomes very interested in very quickly.
That's interesting. Which leads me to another name that I heard today, because I think he's getting a head coaching interview, maybe with the Jets, because the Jets are interviewing everyone for their head coaching job.
Everyone under the sun.
I haven't gotten a message yet. I don't know if you have. But Pep Hamilton is another one. I think Pep Hamilton was interviewed in the Shane Waldron cycle.
He was,
I believe. And that was an interesting cycle because there was a definite turn there where at the beginning of it, they were interviewing guys that seemed like Pete Carroll guys, like old school, that, were aligned with his vision. And then it turned when Russell started to exert some of his influence and ultimately wanted them, was pushing for them to hire a more modern type of offensive coach, and it led them to Shane Waldron. Hamilton's a guy that served under at Michigan for a while under Harbaugh as well, and a guy that I think he also has a bunch of experience with David Shaw too, doesn't he?
He does. And so that's the other interesting point is the offensive line side of this.
He was at Stanford from 2010 to 2012 under David Shaw, who's another guy, more of a pro style fullback, runs the football. He's another guy that I wouldn't be surprised if they asked for permission to talk to.
Couple of things that were interesting too today. I listened, I don't know if you had a chance to, yesterday's interview with Corbin on KJR with Ian Furness. He mentioned something that was kind of interesting to me, or mentioned it on it, which was that Pete Carroll was kind of in on Ryan Grubb. So John Schneider really was in on Ryan Grubb before Mike Macdonald even showed up. They were already looking at him the year before, potentially, if they had to move on and Pete had been here. There might have been a chance Ryan Grubb was going to be our OC regardless, whether it was Mike Macdonald or Pete Carroll this year. The thing with Marcus
Well, I
Brady,
remember,
go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, I remember before the hiring was made official that I think it was Albert Breer that had reported that the NFL had been doing background on Grubb for a while. He was on their radar. Yeah, teams, multiple teams.
The other thing that's interesting about Marcus Brady is where he's been and who he's been under. He's had a lot of comings across of good offensive line coaches. Chris Strazer, who's now the Houston Texans O-line coach, but was also with Denver. You know, he's in Philadelphia where they've been famous for developing and building their offensive line. So if he's a guy that you potentially tag, and even now down in Sandy or in LA, and Jim Harbaugh, you know, he's going to have connections to an NFL tree. He's been in the NFL since 2012. So he's been here a while. He's been around with a lot of good coaches. And the only reason he ended up losing his job in Indianapolis is because Frank Reich got fired. So they fired everybody.
Yep.
Everyone was let go at that point. So it wasn't due to, you know, a situation. It was Frank Reich had hired him. They got rid of everybody. Jim Irsay is kind of known for doing that kind of thing. So that's why Marcus Brady for me is kind of moving up my list of guys to the top. You know, everyone talks about Tanner Engstrand if he potentially becomes available. The other guy that I'm interested in, everyone wants to talk about Josh McCown because he's this, you know, young up and coming guy in the NFL, quarterback coach, played in the league, and that definitely has some merit. The other guy that I'm more interested in, to be brutally honest, is Mark Brunell, who's the quarterback coach for the Detroit Lions. He has ties to the Pacific Northwest. He played at UW for one. He was under Sean Payton and Drew Brees as the backup quarterback, really backup quarterback / quarterback coach with the Saints when they won their Super Bowls. And he's been there since Jared Goff has come to Detroit and kind of helped. Everyone wants to talk about Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson has mentioned numerous times how Mark Brunell has helped Jared Goff ascend to what he has now become as a quarterback. We talk about if we do draft our eventual quarterback of the future after Geno, we want to have someone that understands that. Well, both Marcus Brady and Mark Brunell have played professional quarterback. Bringing in a young quarterback to an offensive coordinator that's going to understand those things, that's a big sell point for me outside of getting a guy that, you know, has an O-line background. I want a guy that's going to be able to get our rookie potential next quarterback set up for success in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. So here he's such an intriguing name that now I find myself once again rooting against a team in the playoffs as the Chargers take on the Texans.
Yeah, so do I.
This week in that first round in
they
Houston.
Put slips in, so the only way you can put slips in is for teams that are in the playoffs.
Yeah, which would apply to, you know, you mentioned Brady from the Chargers. Obviously, that would apply to Stenovich. Is that how you pronounce his name? From the Green Bay Packers. Interesting to look around too and see if there might be some other guys with some of those teams that would apply to Mike LaFleur, obviously with the Rams. Another name that came up today that I thought was interesting is Clint Kubiak. Who's probably not going to be retained with the Saints because they're going to hire a new head coach and they usually bring in their own staff unless it's a young head coach because that's not that desirable of a job. They're not in a great position with the cap. They're going to have to let go of a bunch of veteran players. They haven't drafted all that well the last few years. And so maybe they do have to go with an inexperienced guy who wants to retain Kubiak. But heading into last year, he was one of the hot names. Obviously, you know, with the connections with his dad, the work he had done in Minnesota. I think he'd been in San Francisco prior to that, right? So he'd worked under Shanahan, yet another guy from that tree. It's amazing to me sometimes how quickly the shine comes off of some of these guys where no one's talking about Clint Kubiak really because the Saints didn't have a good year, but he's a guy that was just 11 months ago was very, very highly sought after.
100%. And it's also interesting when, you know, guys fail as coordinators their first go around and they learn some stuff, they go somewhere else, they become, you know, reinvigorated and understand things differently and how they would do things differently and have success with it. The interesting thing here that you bring up the Saints and Clint Kubiak not being retained there most likely is Detroit could be in a very, very big pickle here because if Ben Johnson gets hired and Aaron Glenn gets hired down in New Orleans, there could be a good chance New Orleans takes Tanner Engstrand down there and Aaron Glenn hires him down there as his OC. And say Seattle were to hire Mark Brunell, that Detroit offensive room has now been completely gutted. And that's the one thing we're not thinking about. Like if Aaron Glenn, because both coordinators for Detroit are up for jobs, we're thinking about the Ben Johnson. Oh, it's just an assumed thing that Tanner Engstrom would take the job. If Aaron Glenn gets hired in New Orleans, which there's a lot of people that are thinking that's just going to happen, he could take Tanner with him down to the Saints. And then if Seattle hypothetically, they go after Mark Brunell, if they do decide to go that route, there's three of your main prominent guys there with that resurgence of Detroit. Like Detroit could be in a real pickle next year with their offensive staff and having to rehire most of it because everyone disperses for jobs as OCs or head coaches somewhere else.
It's the Super Bowl hangover. It happens to every team. We just saw it happen to the 49ers. It's happened to the Rams over the last couple of years where you get poached. It's not just the shorter recovery time in the offseason and all those things that impact your roster physically, but your coaching staffs get poached. The 49ers have not recovered from Robert Saleh leaving. You know, there are other examples of that, of teams. It doesn't really impact the Rams. You know, every year somebody hires an offensive coordinator off of his staff, but it's still McVay, so it doesn't really impact them. That's some of the dominoes that are going to happen are interesting, which is why, at the top of the show, Mike talked about how, it sucks. We wish we were in the tournament. We think we could have done some damage there, but the silver lining of it all is we get to get started on the process now and hopefully get a jump on these teams with these candidates. And he said, he was asked about how attractive he thinks the job is. And he said, he tried to explain it, and then he wrapped it up basically by saying, I think it's the most appealing job in the league that's available right now for coordinators, and we'll get a lot of, which is funny because I had someone comment on my video from earlier today. Why would anybody want to take this OC job with how bad the offensive line is, which is just a level of ignorance it's hard for me to even comment on. But first of all, that's not how coaches are wired, right? They think they can make it better. And also because there are some pieces in place and we saw some improvement. Let's get into some of that stuff in just, but let me take care of some obligations first here. Guys, you've heard me talk about them. Doer, the best apparel company I'd never heard of up until this year. Doer, D-U-E-R, built for doing lifestyle apparel for all occasions. And I'm a huge fan of those right there. Those denim relaxed performance stretch jeans, 20% stretch. And these things are incredibly comfortable, but they're built to last. They're built like whatever name brand of jeans you're used to wearing. As soon as you get them out of the package, you know how good they are. And I can't stop wearing these things. Also, the moleskin shirt that you're going to see here, really soft, really comfortable, really stylish. You can wear it in a whole bunch of different applications. And they're simply one of the best levels of apparel I've ever worn. And right now you can get 20% off your first order by going to shopdoer.com/forever. That's shopdoer, DUER/forever for 20% off your first order. I can assure you, you will not regret it. I cannot stop buying this stuff. Yeah, it's a problem. It's kind of taken the place of Seahawks apparel for me this year. Okay, so let's get back into it. And some of the other things that Macdonald talked about today. He was asked quite a bit about his defense, right? Interestingly enough, no one really asked him about Ernest Jones. Maybe because I think Ernest made it pretty clear in the locker room after the game on Sunday that he wants to be here and he sees it getting done. He was asked about Reek Woolen. I didn't pull the sound from that, but based on his answer there, I don't think Reek's going anywhere. I think he loves him still. And he was asked about Byron Murphy. There are some who feel like maybe we didn't get the production out of him, at least statistically, that we were looking for his rookie season. 0 sacks on the year. Here's what he had to say about his first round draft.
I'm watching this guy do what he does at practice every day, every pass rush rep. AD, those guys are doing the same thing, and he does this stuff at a high level. He plays really hard. He's a great technician for being how young he is. Just tough as nails going out there and playing the last game. Not 100% and working through it. Production-wise, like I know the sacks aren't there in the pass rush reps, but like every time this guy's taking a 3-technique pass rush rep, that means Leonard Williams isn't on the field. And right now, I think Leonard's probably the best, interior D lineman in the game. So it's like, what do you want to do? So we have to be more creative to get him on the field, but he'll earn those opportunities. And and the production will be there in the long run. I'm convinced of that. This guy's a really good player.
Kind of how he talks about all of his young players. Like, talked about Christian Haynes that way today as well. Like, we really love him, but we think there's more ahead. And he even said early in the season, he said, somebody asked him, basically was egging him on to praise Byron Murphy. And he said, look, I don't want to, I think it was on the Salk and Heward coaching show one day after one of the shows. And he said, look, I don't want to say too many good things because the guy's a rookie, we got to make him earn it. I think if there's one thing that encourages me the most heading into this offseason, it's that we found a defense. We found the scheme got incorporated. They figured out how to communicate it properly. They dialed some things back at a certain point when they were struggling earlier this season, and it clicked. They were able to find some of the right players. Kobe Bryant was a revelation. The Ernest Jones trade, he mentioned Tyrese Knight, how well he played as a rookie at the other linebacker spot. And then obviously Murphy. I think we can feel good about this defense heading into next year, right? I mean, all the pieces are in place.
I definitely think so. I think the one thing, with that comment I kind of get from Mike is they want to add another piece there to free up Byron from certain responsibilities he had to take this year. Because like you said, if Byron's taking a true 3-tech snap, then Leonard Williams is off the field. Overall, though, I get the feeling that, yes, he's happy, but there's still pieces he's missing. I still get that vibe from him that there's still something missing from his defense that he wants. I don't know if that's another corner that truly can play opposite of Reek and really allow him to use Devin in an even more weaponized way than what he did this year. Because I think there were times, and I saw it in the Vikings game, I saw it in other times where you could see like Josh Jobe was struggling, Trey Brown was struggling, so they had to put Devin outside and they'd move in, Jenkins into that nickel spot, and you could see that it wasn't ideally how they wanted to do things. Like they had packages for Jenkins to come on the field, but really they like Devin around that area and in the box. So I think it'll be interesting to see what pieces they do add to the defense. The other side of someone, we talked about Christian Haynes. He sees him as a guard, which was very interesting to hear because we had heard last week they were trying him at center. I think part of Christian's problem might have been the fact of playing at UConn and maybe not being NFL ready as much as we thought and heard he might be. And I think the scheme didn't help either. And the indecisiveness on this running scheme and this offense throughout the year, I think that played a big factor in it. And I think maybe that's why they might have gone like, he talked about, it wasn't that Christian didn't do enough. It's that LeMaya did a little bit more. It might have been the fact that LeMaya's played more snaps at Utah as a starter and had more experience in that regard that got him the ability to start the final 6 games of the season. Maybe next year, Christian Haynes has a year. The offensive coach comes in. Maybe they get a new line coach. The OC brings a new line coach with them. And all of a sudden, Christian Haynes becomes a revelation playing left guard or something like that occurs for Seattle. So it was positive to hear Mike Macdonald not kind of shy away from talking about Christian Haynes, almost inviting it and inviting the conversation.
Yeah, he brought it up.
The same way he did about somebody else, for me, that was huge, which was Kenny McIntosh.
Yeah. Yeah, I always love when he name drops guys unprompted, and he did that with both those players. The Haynes thing was interesting because he was asked about the draft class as a whole, and the first thing he wanted to talk about was how good he thinks Haynes is and how he figures into their future. And then he said, then when he started talking about Murphy in the clip I just played, he prefaced it by saying, I probably should have talked about Byron first because he was a first round pick, but Haynes was the first name that popped into his mind, right? You talk about the running game. This is something I wanted to ask you as an offensive coordinator. They went back and forth between, they ran some outside zone, some inside zone, some gap power, and Grubb kind of talked about that as if it was something he took pride in, that like we're multiple and we're versatile and teams aren't going to know what to plan for. That's not typical though, right? So I want to ask this to you in two ways as a guy who coaches offense. A, which one do you prefer? Well, let me ask it this way. Do you think it's important to pick one or the other, pick a lane and stick with it and become really good at that one thing? And then B, with the personnel we have on hand on that offensive line, those young linemen they've invested so many draft picks in, what do you think would fit that group the best?
So to answer part A, generally when I've done it and other OCs I've been around, you have an identity with your run scheme and you pick it and you kind of stick to it. And you may sprinkle in the odd opposite view of it, the odd gap power if you're a heavy zone team. But part of it is when you say are a heavy zone team, whether it's inside or wide, there's your variation in it. We're a wide zone, and then we come back to an inside zone. And then once we get teams understanding that's what we do, then we'll throw the odd counter in, which you'll see, a zone and then a backside pull. And you run, the Rams are famous for doing it a lot of the time to us, where you see that cutback lane that opens up, but it's actually designed to be there. And the problem when you kind of do what Ryan Grubb did, where you're back and forth, you don't get good at anything. You don't get good at the point of attack. And zone, a big part of it is the point of attack on the edges and how you are able to move it, because you're moving on a diagonal, right? You're not moving straight down the field. You're moving on a diagonal. And a lot of it is teamwork from, okay, so our tackle, and say if Seattle's in 13 personnel, or sorry, I should say 11 personnel, and you've got AJ Barner off of Abe Lucas at right tackle, and we're running zone right, Barner and Lucas have to work together until Barner can get to the next guy in the next level, until Abe has control of that initial point of attack. And that works down to your guard who plays on the D tackle, and then your center like Olu would help and assist. And once, say in that case, LeMaya has control of that D tackle and is able to move them, then we can get to the next level. And that's where you hear that next level conversation happen, is we're able to branch off of our zone and start layering it out. And that's where, when Seattle used to be extremely good at the zone with Tom Cable, was because they'd cut. So you would cut guys in that front line, and you were able to get guys like Max Unger and other guys in J.R. Sweezy to the second level a lot easier, because you cut that first line down and not have to double team it to move up. I've done both.
And then they outlawed that. And
yes. And you saw the big thing that comes with it.
Became
the big thing for me with zone is it depends on how you want to do it. If you want to run inside zone, you need to have big but agile guards.
Okay.
If you want to run outside zone, you have to have big and agile tackles. And the problem for Seattle right now is you have a mishmash of everything. Like Anthony Bradford could be a good zone guard, needs to lose a little bit of weight, but he could be, because he's got the size and the aggressiveness to drive someone forward.
Yeah.
The problem you've got now is you've got tackles that are built for an outside zone scheme from Shane Waldron with Charles Cross and Abe Lucas, but Lincoln Tomlinson and Olu Atimi and some of these other guys you've got are more gap scheme guys on the inside. So you're kind of got this split. And that's where I think you saw Seattle wasn't able to commit to anything, because if you had Lincoln and Bradford and Connor Williams out there, it's like, okay, great. We've got two guards that are probably better suited, like the way Bradford's built now, are better suited for gap power, but our tackle centers are better at wide zone and zone running. So what do we do here? Okay, well, we'll do a little bit of everything. Well, it also affects your play action game, because your play action sets up very differently off of zone versus gap power.
I know that you have to go in a few minutes because you got to go coach a bunch of quarterbacks. So let's get to some of these comments, because we got a ton of them. Thanks for everybody for tuning in tonight. Robert Hale says, it feels like Ryan Grubb's hire was more of a John Schneider preference than Mike, because he did bring tough physical running game to complement the style of football that Mike wanted. Did you mean didn't bring the tough physical running game? I think so too. Mike was asked about this today. That's when he got really short with Greg Bell. And when Greg asked him, are you going to be more involved in the OC hire this time? And he said, I was 100% involved last time. I'll be 100% involved this time. Macdonald was a big part of that decision. And as Brady Henderson reported, had to convince Macdonald he would bring this style of running game to, along with his scheme. And he didn't execute it. He just didn't show it.
No, he didn't. And I didn't answer the second part to your question there, Dan. Preferably for me, I like gap power more than I like zone.
Okay.
Reason for that, you can run more misdirection off of it, and you get downhill quicker for your running back. Your running back doesn't have to be as patient. He can hit the hole and go.
That's what I was going to say. And that's where I think I prefer it too, because with zone is so dependent on the running back being able to sense when to put his foot in the ground and make that cut kind of against the grain, right? It's almost like you're anticipating where the space is going to be before you see it. And you're trusting that the flow going against your direction is that there's going to be an opportunity there. And that seems like something that Walker struggles with. Maybe McIntosh and Charbonnet are a little bit better at that, but certainly we've seen in the last couple of weeks with Walker out that Charbonnet and McIntosh would seem to thrive, I think, in a gap power scheme where they know where the hole's designed to be and they're going to hit it hard. And then they're going to, be physical and look for an opening.
Yes. And the thing with gap power too, and the thing you can do with gap power too, that I like a lot more is you get more boot action out of it, mainly because you're running downhill inside the tackles a lot more. And you're able to suck a defense down inside more to your run action. So for your QB to get out on the edge on a boot is a lot easier because those ends will crash harder. The linebackers will squeeze down and reduce in their gap control more than a zone where they'll tend to stay out wider because they're waiting for you to come out.
All right, let's see what else we got here. We've got a lot of Go Hawks and this is off subject, but let's do it. Osiris asks, is it time for a uniform branding colors update? I saw a sweet refresh mock-up that used the throwback blue and Kelly green with gray as the main colors in the current logo. So good. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. You and I did, or after the show on Sunday, I think.
So, yeah.
It feels like the time would be now for a uniform refresh because next year will be their 50th season, right?
Yeah, and I think there was a lot of talk about it this season. It seems like every 10 years the Seahawks or so have changed their jerseys. They started in 22 with those Holmgren and Hasselbeck jerseys that we all loved. And then they moved in 2012 to what we have currently. I got a feeling they're going to go to something with the main logo, the design of the main logo, but the retro colors. That's what they're going to probably do and incorporate. I think that, where the retro pant stripe is that they've had for years, I think what they'll do is they'll incorporate the feather concept that they've got currently on their pant into that, but it'll be the new color. It'll be the retro colors. I think you'll see the silver helmet come back. I think that's the way you'll see the Hawks go, is they'll appease everybody by going retro colors and a retro design, but they'll incorporate modernism to it.
I'm telling you, if those throwbacks exceeded my expectation, I knew they would look really clean given, the modern kind of version of the uniform where it's so tight fitting and stretchy and all that. They blew me away. If they just switched to those full time with some alternate thrown in, I'd be more than happy with that. Plus everyone's already bought throwback uniforms. And so they wouldn't have to go out and buy new stuff, which
exactly
is probably why they would go with something else, because they want to sell a bunch more jerseys. Right. This one's interesting because there is news today that the Chicago Bears are giving Pete Carroll a head coaching interview. When this was brought up a couple of weeks ago that he was interested in the job and reached out, I kind of dismissed it. I thought they'd probably want to go with someone younger. But the fact that he's agreed to interview with them tells me, it answers my biggest question about Pete coming back to coaching, that he obviously no longer is going to demand full control, that he probably knows now that he won't be able to do that if he wants one of these jobs. He saw what happened last offseason with Bill Belichick.
Yeah.
And now nobody wanted to hire the greatest coach in NFL history because he wanted a bunch of control. Do you think it's realistic to think that a 73-year-old Pete Carroll can still have success in this league going to a young team?
I think so, because Pete's an amazing culture builder.
Yeah.
I don't think Pete's designed to be what Pete was when he came in retrospect to what he did here in Seattle. I don't think he has the juice to be a defensive mastermind like he was with the cover 3 in the Legion of Boom and all that. But for a team like Chicago, or even like the other team I've heard that may be interested in him is the Raiders, is you got a guy that can come in and set your culture in the right direction. Maybe they get into the playoffs. Maybe they do something with Pete in 2 or 3 years, right? But I don't think Pete's the guy taking you to a Super Bowl, but I think Pete's the guy that gets you to the next guy that takes you to the Super Bowl. And I think that's what organizations like this need right now, and why Pete might be more involved in this offseason, coaches hunt for teams, is because he has such a good track record building culture.
Yeah, I've completely turned around on this. I thought, no, it's crazy. They'd want to get a young up and coming guy, but those guys fail so often. And the Bears have been floundering for so long, and they have such an opportunity now because they have the young quarterback in place. They've got a bunch of other talent on the roster. All they need is a direction and some guidance. I think what it would take, I think Pete would have to give up some control and delegate. I think he'd have to have a plan when he goes in there for his interview of who he's going to bring with him as a defensive coordinator, because that would be my biggest question to him. Wouldn't be, hey, what's your energy level? How long do you think you can coach? Why would I hire a 73-year-old coach? It would be, hey, your calling card's been defense your entire career. Your defense has stunk progressively for the last 4 years. How are you going to fix that? And I think it would require him bringing someone with him to do that. Maybe I can't even think of the name right now, but somebody that he trusts, another veteran defensive coordinator, to come in there and kind of run the show on that side of the ball.
So here's an interesting nugget. Mike McCarthy was requested by the Chicago Bears for an interview, was denied.
That tells me they've got an extension in place. I think the contracts there in Dallas, I think they expire on the 14th.
They do. So I think there's going to be an extension coming there.
Although it wouldn't preclude, now that he knows there's interest there, like McCarthy could turn down the extension and just wait till the 14th and take the interview. Right?
Yep.
I mean, he might want to go somewhere that has a young quarterback like Caleb Williams to work with. Interesting. Very, very interesting. We squeeze in a couple more here before you go.
Sure.
I did want to throw this in there because I've got a couple of comments along this line. I know that throwing him under the bus is a strong term, and it's meant to imply, criticism and kind of being underhanded. I didn't mean to imply that. Maybe I didn't choose the right words. But I most definitely think that Macdonald was pretty clear today that some of those reasons we pointed out were contributing factors to why he decided to move on from Ryan Grubb, even though I may have not used the best words there. Lots of draft talk, which gives us an opportunity to talk about this. Here, let's do this for a second before you go. If you haven't heard already, let me go back and throw this off. And I know you've got to go, but after you go, I'll stick around and take on some of these comments and questions for those of you waiting.
Yeah, I got about 10 more minutes.
The Pick is In. It's a new YouTube channel. It's already been set up. Head over there at the Pick is In Pod. That's how you'll find it on YouTube. It's also our Twitter handle. We are going to launch a second channel that will look at the whole league, the entire draft, not just Seahawks specific. We'll continue to do that type of content on each of our own channels. But we're such draft nerds. We need to expand our scope, and we're going to do that with this new channel. We hope that you all join along. All right, let's go back here and get a couple of these in before you got to go. There you go. You've already turned Jeff Scott. You sold me on Brady.
I really think people should really take a deep dive on Brady and what he, when he was with Indianapolis, they didn't have a great receiving core. He was still able to maximize it. He had to deal with an aging Matt Ryan at the time and Carson Wentz, and he was able to get Jonathan Taylor to his best season with, we talk about running the ball here and we want to run it. Jonathan Taylor had 1,800 yards and 18 rushing touchdowns the year Marcus Brady was the offensive coordinator.
Now, devil's advocate, the flip side of that argument is, well, during that time, the Indianapolis Colts had what was regarded as the best offensive line in football. And if Ryan Grubb had that, he might have been able to have some more success too, which is, it's always an interesting point. But still, I think the fact that Ryan really was at the end of his line there and really struggled and ended up being benched, you had to find a way to run the football, even though teams knew that's what you were going to do. That wide receiver core in Indy didn't strike fear into anybody at the time.
Negative.
And I think that's actually a check in the OC's favor, that they were still able to run the ball in those circumstances. Maybe Brunell could help Geno as well. Certainly, veteran quarterbacks, old quarterbacks talk the same language, right?
Yep, they do.
Jeff has a job opportunity for you. Says you should be heading up the Hawks staffing committee. Get in on it.
Hey, if they ever gave me the opportunity, I'd love to.
Dogzilla Monster, thanks for the super thanks. Serious, where's the Hawks green get pick I paid for? The green get pick. What do you mean, Dogzilla? Not quite sure what that means. Let me know. All right, let's jump out of this for now. As I said, I'll stick around. Let's do this. Excited about the new show. excited about the offseason. We're going to learn a lot more about this coaching staff. And I think we're going to learn a lot more about how John Schneider operates, because he too, there's been so much focus about how, hey, Macdonald and his staff get a full offseason now to prepare for the next year and get everything dialed in. So does John Schneider. He doesn't have to worry about hiring a head coach right now. He knows who he is. He knows what the schemes are. He knows what types of players they want, what types of players they need. I think we're going to get a better idea this offseason of how Schneider operates without Pete Carroll being involved than we did last season, especially considering that he might be on a seat that's getting warmer as we get closer to next season.
Absolutely. And it's going to be interesting to see, how this, OC search goes. From the press conference, it sounds like they kind of want to have someone in place sooner rather than later. They don't want to have to drag this out too long. And I'm interested to see, what changes John Schneider does make to his philosophy, because I think Mike Macdonald isn't going to necessarily always agree with John Schneider, even though he kind of alluded to it. I think there's going to be points where he may push John in certain directions of like, hey, like we need to address this O-line correctly. Yes, we have some young guys. They may go and make a play in free agency for a big old, a actual starting offensive lineman that's capable of bringing a little bit more, not necessarily continuity, but consistency to the position. And I think when we find out whoever this offensive coordinator ends up being for Seattle, it'll answer some questions about the rest of the staff, the direction they're going to go in. And I think you're going to see whoever the offensive coordinator they hire is what does that say to Geno Smith and his future here in Seattle? Because I think that's going to be one of the pressing questions for that offensive coordinator is, how are you going to help Geno with his turnover issues in the red zone?
Well, and I think the hire may also give us a hint as to how they see the future. If someone's hired who has a track record of working with young quarterbacks and developing young quarterbacks, it could, also indicate that they have an eye on the future and plan at some point to add someone that they think is going to need to develop for them. Final point before I let you go. Just kind of wrap up how you feel about where this organization and this team sits right now heading into this offseason before I let you go.
I think this organization views itself as a few pieces away from being a true contender. But for me, the definition is, what are they truly looking to contend? Because I don't see this team as a Super Bowl contender. I see them as a playoff contender. I see them potentially as a, 1 or 2 win, maybe playoff team currently as constructed until the offensive line gets better, until they have an answer at the quarterback position outside of Geno Smith. Like, where's that bridge going, the Geno bridge? And until that's truly answered, I'm always going to be nervous of this team being on a bit of an up and down roller coaster with 1 year we may have 12 wins, and then we may come back the next year and have 9 or 10 wins and miss the playoffs. Like, the one thing that we had when we, we're the Legion of Boom and going to our Super Bowls and all that is there was a level of consistency where we excelled over other position groups in the NFL. And you just knew when the Seahawks lined up that they were in every game they played in. And if they ever got blown out, it was like a rarity and something seriously went wrong.
Yeah, there was that long stretch there where they didn't have any games that were decided by less than 7 points.
Right. And that's the thing I don't see yet. And that's the mark to me of a true contender, is having a shared vision, having an identity on both sides of the football. And if their identity is to be physical and dictate terms like Mike Macdonald has used over and over again with the defense and the offense, then John Schneider, you need to start doing the things to make this a physical unit and a dictating terms team. And that's going to be the interesting point.
Agreed. Always good to have you on. Anything you want to promote for your channel here coming up in the next few days?
I will be doing a 3-round mock draft either Thursday or Friday live. I'm going to get that up, do a kind of a quick one because I've only dived in about as deep as you have, Dan. We have our first live mock, obviously, with the pick is in. Sunday, we're going live at 12 o'clock with Rob Staten. We have him coming over onto our show to kind of break down all the news that's going on and get Rob's kind of draft insight. And I just want to thank everyone for helping us get to 1,000 subscribers. We finally got over that hump. So that's a big deal for us there at the Hawkzone. And Thank you, Dan. You were a big support in that. And yeah, guys, go check out our store, hawkzonerundown.com. That's where you can get our hats, sweatshirts, hoodies, toques, all that kind of stuff, t-shirts. We just came out with a new logo, an alternate logo for our Hawkzone Rundown t-shirts. So yeah, head over there and check that stuff out and drop a sub and over on our channel at the hawkzonerundown.com.
Anyone who doesn't know what toque means, look up Doug and Bob McKenzie and just do yourself a favor and listen to their old material, and you'll learn along the process as you're laughing as well. All right, you got to go coach some QBs, man. Thanks for coming on the show, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Dan. Talk to you soon.
All right, see you. All right, always good to have Bryce on. Can't wait to launch the new channel with him. All right, let's get back in here and see what we got. McVira says Arthur Smith staying in Pittsburgh. He's being interviewed for the Jets job, so he could get a head coaching job again. But yeah, he's going to stay in Pittsburgh if not for that. Typically coordinators sign 3-year deals. He's not going to leave that job to come here. Doubt that very, very seriously. Maybe if he was working for a dysfunctional franchise, he might be looking to skip ship, but Steelers are about as stable as they come. So I don't think he's going anywhere. Oh, there we go. The pick for that sweet Creed guitar hanging behind you, a Hawks green pick would complement the look you have going on. Okay, I gotcha. I don't have one, or I might have an assorted collection of picks around here somewhere. Thanks for clarifying, Dogzilla. Mr. XDN, in my humble opinion, Mike's vision for the offense and the team as a whole will benefit Geno. Run the ball in the right situation. The ball in the right complementary football includes the run. I agree. And I think, maybe we'll end on this note. I think, we're going to talk a lot more about the quarterback position as we move forward. We're going to talk a lot about the draft. And, I'm on record. And if you haven't watched it yet, go back and watch my episode from a few days ago on all the different options the Seahawks would have and how to handle Geno Smith this offseason and the future of that position. Which is, just to summarize again, I think they should absolutely hold Geno and maybe even extend him, keep him here for a couple more years, but actively pursue and acquire a young quarterback that they feel like can be the future and start that timetable and start that clock. All the more reason to try and fortify these other aspects of the offense, right? Good offensive line that can give you pass protection, being able to run the football and dictate terms, be physical, run the football when you need to kill the clock and when teams are expecting you to run, being a successful 3rd and short team. All those things will benefit a young quarterback just as much as it will Geno. And I think for those of you who are just adamantly against the idea of keeping Geno around, don't think he's a good NFL quarterback that you can win with. Look at what he did this year and then look at what he had to work with in regards to poor pass protection. One of the shortest times to throw in the league. Ineffective running game. No threat of a run because they wouldn't run play action or go under center until the end of the year. And even then it wasn't that effective because they didn't do it right. The fact that Ryan Grubb was comfortable leaving his tackles on an island almost all the time, even when they were struggling, even when they were on their 4th string right tackle, didn't help him out with 12, 13 personnel, having a tight end over there, a guy to chip and help out. Even though they went out this offseason and signed in free agency and gave significant money to Farrell Brown, who was supposed to be one of the best blocking tight ends in the league, and drafted another guy in AJ Barner, who was known as an outstanding blocker, just didn't use that to help Geno. Teams knew he was going to throw the football 70% of the time. They knew he was going to throw it out of empty backfield and gun most of the time. That's an advantage for the defense. And yet he was still able to finish in the top 10 in the league and 4th in yards, top 5 in completion percentage, top 5 in big time throw percentage, on target throw percentage, top 5 in the least number of poor throws and off target throws, all of those things. And you're doing all of those things into the teeth of a defense that knows that's how you're going to attack them. Imagine if you can build up those other aspects with a good coordinator that has a feel for the game, makes adjustments, they build a solid offensive line. It's a win-win-win. put you in a better position to win with Geno until you find that next guy, and it gives that next guy an opportunity to succeed. And my final point will just be this. Again, I'm going to talk about this till I'm blue in the face this offseason. One of the arguments that I get presented to me whenever I'm debating this topic, or in the comments here, or in the comments of the YouTube channel, is John Schneider hasn't built a good offensive line in 10 years. What makes you think he'll do it now? And I would say this. Mike Macdonald touched on this concept in his press conference today. He said, quote, players are allowed to get better, end quote. And what he meant by that was you can't just judge a football player by what he is today. If coaches did that, they wouldn't coach for very long. They wouldn't have successful careers. Players not only do we have to assume that they can get better, but I think you have to assume in most cases they will. If they have the traits and they have the talent, they have the blueprint to be a good player, and then they're coached up properly and given reps, given meaningful reps and opportunities, they're probably going to get better over time. Well, so can coaches. How many head coaches have we seen and coordinators get fired, learn, as Bryce pointed out, go on and become successful elsewhere? Bill Belichick was once fired as a head coach. And general managers can get better too. And we've seen it, right? How much better have our drafts looked the last 3 years than they did previously? And John talks openly about why that is, some of the specific lessons and mistakes that they made that they learned from. Just because he's been doing it for 15 years doesn't mean that he has his entire philosophy and approach locked down and he's never going to stray from that. Remember 4 years ago when our defensive line was horrible, ineffective, couldn't get any pressure on the quarterback, and they were constantly chasing players, trading for Carlos Dunlap at the deadline, right? Guys like that at the end of their career, bringing Jadeveon Clowney in here at the last minute that year because they had nobody else to rush the passer. The Sheldon Richardson trade, right? They kept doing this over and over again. And it's very similar in the matter that a lot of you really want to diss John for his comment that, guards get overpaid and overdrafted. And then his comment the other day that they don't really take part in big time free agency. Well, he used to feel that way about the defensive line position too. They traded Frank Clark because they didn't want to pay him $20 million a year. But now, 5-6 years later, they paid Leonard Williams. He's learned. And I wonder if he could go back and do that again. If he would have, hindsight being 2020, if he would have held on to Frank Clark instead of, drafting LJ Collier in his place that year. He's learned. There's also a ton of young assets on that offensive line. They're not going to give up on those guys. McDonald made that clear today. They're going to get better. They did get better. That offensive line at the end of the year, worlds better than it was the first half of the year. And I would submit to you that if that offensive line that we had the last 6 weeks was there all year, I think this might have been a much different ball game. Maybe Ryan Grubb would still have a job, right? Abraham Lucas yesterday in an exit interview said, I am just now supposed to be fully healing from the surgery I had 12 months ago. And I was able to make it work for 8 games. Now I get to go into the offseason healthy and rehab and get stronger. And he name dropped one guy. He said, do you know who I'm most excited to work out with this offseason? Because I think he can get a lot stronger. And when he does, he's going to be a great player. Christian Haynes. That's who Abe Lucas name dropped. Not Stal Lamea, not Oluwatimi, not Jalen Sundell, not Anthony Bradford, Christian Haynes. Players get better, coaches get better, GMs can get better. And John Schneider's not stupid. He has his ear to the ground. He knows what's being said about him in the organization. He knows that his seat is hotter than it's ever been. And if he doesn't fix this one glaring weakness on the team, he won't have a job anymore. And I can tell you from personal experience, I know this to be a fact. John Schneider wants to spend the entirety of the rest of his NFL career here in Seattle. It's his home now. It's where his family's entrenched, loves it here, loves the organization, never wants to go anywhere else. He's going to do everything he can to try and win another championship and solidify his legacy and his career here. So I say that just because I would like for you all to just be a little bit more optimistic and open-minded. Those of you who are leaning towards the more cynical side. I, for one, can't wait to see how this offseason unfolds. Can't wait to see who the new coordinator is. Can't wait to see what they do in free agency. Can't wait for the draft. And on that note, just to remind you, I will be going to Mobile on the 26th. I'll be spending the entire week there of the Senior Bowl, all the media availabilities, all the practices, get to talk to players, coaches, other media members, and the like. Here we go. True Metal Jake says Schneider's never going anywhere as long as Jody owns the team. I think we thought that about Pete. Jody's not the only one that calls the shots. Bert Cold has a ton of influence. He was one of the loudest voices that wanted Mike Holmgren to be removed when he was. He and Todd Lewicki at the time led the charge to bring Pete Carroll in. And he was one of the loudest voices in wanting to remove Pete Carroll when they did as well. It's not just Jody. And at the end of the day, she wants this team to win championships again. And if they don't take a step forward this next year, I'm not so sure John's all that safe. Now, his contract runs through the draft in 2026, but don't be so sure. He's not on scholarship, right? He's got to win. Let me just finish on this. Just to let you know what's coming up the rest of this week. Tomorrow, Brian Nemhauser from Hawk Blogger will be with me to recap his first season as a credentialed reporter for the Seahawks, and what a great job he did. Bryce mentioned him. I've name dropped him a lot. Just thought he hit it out of the park, and I can't wait to get his thoughts on this Seahawk team and how he felt about how their season went and what lies ahead in the offseason, as well as Corbin Smith from All Seahawks and Locked on Seahawks will be joining me Friday with his input at all as well. And again, can't wait to talk to him. You know, he had that great story that came out yesterday with some inside information and some anonymous sourcing from inside the Seahawks building about how that thing went down with Ryan Grubb and Mike Macdonald. So stay tuned for that. And the best way to do that, subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit that bell button for notification of future episodes. Shout out to BetUS for sponsoring this program. Thanks to all of you for watching and subscribing, sharing the program, listening on audio, all of those things. Follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Seahawks Forever. And again, be sure to go to at The Pick Is In Pod on Twitter and also YouTube to subscribe and follow there as well. Until next time, forever and always go Hawks. I'm Dan. Thanks for watching.